Welcome everybody who's joining us on the live stream right now. My name is Arielle Brousse. I'm here representing Kelly Writers House. I no longer work at Writers House, but I have been a member of the Kelly Writers House community since 2003, 2002. And I've been doing this event now, the Sensible Nonsense Project, which you're all here for the better part of a decade. We had our first event in Writers House in 2013. This is, I believe, our 11th such event with Kelly Writers House. And we continue on, we forge forward, thanks very much to the Lucy F. DeMarco Fund for Youth Literature. So I'm really glad that in this super weird time, we can continue to do all of this together, even online, even without shoes. I'm also not in my usual fare. I usually wear some kind of t-shirt that's representative of a children's book, and I ran out because we've done a bunch of these so far, but I did bring Lily, who is one of my favorite characters in children's literature. If you've never read Lily's Purple Plastic Purse, please do. We've got a great lineup tonight. I'm just going to do a quick introduction for those of you who are new to the program. When I first came to Penn, I was super intimidated. I was a scholarship kid. I really loved reading, and I came to Writers House, and I feel like there is, at an elite institution like Penn, there's a lot of feeling like you need to one-up each other, feeling like you need to have read the canon and represent a lot of really, really brilliant writers. And I was always the kid who had to be dragged kicking and screaming out of the children's section of the library because I just wanted to read my favorites over and over. And I kept thinking, is there room for that? Is there room for the books that we loved when we were children that we never really outgrew? Is there room for looking at the value in that? Is there room for interrogating the value that we used to find that we maybe no longer do? I mean, obviously this past year, there's been a reckoning with J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter series. Most recently, the pulling of 6 Dr. Seuss books has people up in arms. These are works of art. They have lasting impact. They are formative when we are first starting to engage with narrative and form our sense of self. These children's books are super, super important. So I just wanted to take a moment and get people together, not just people who consider themselves readers or writers or people who engage with books on a daily basis, but people who had ever read, which is most of us, to think about how these books impacted us. So the Sensible Nonsense Project was born. And I really am excited to share all of you today. Our first reader is going to be a fellow member of the Kelly Writers House. I met him, I don't know how many years ago, Josh, but we haunted those walls together. Josh Herren is a writer and elementary school teacher based right here in Philadelphia. He has a BA of the University of Pennsylvania, where he worked at Kelly Writers House and wrote about history, sexuality, and art. He currently writes about theater for Findy and the Broad Street Review. And he also hosts the Chosen by Committee podcast, in which he and his co-hosts are reading every Pulitzer Prize-winning play since 1918, so you don't have to. Josh is passionate about education, theater, and convincing others that Philadelphia is the greatest city on earth. If any of you in the comments need convincing, we're on it. He is also married to KWH alum Henry Steinberg, who is probably also in the chat. So Josh, I'm so happy to have you.
Hi, Arielle, thank you. I'm gonna try to see if I can do my glasses if it's not too distracting. All right, hello everyone. It's so great to be back in this community, albeit virtually. Like Arielle said, my name is Josh Herren, and I am an elementary school educator in Philadelphia. I am currently teaching an all-remote cohort of 3rd and 4th graders at the Philadelphia School, a progressive school in Center City, Philadelphia. I think I have some students and colleagues here, so hi everyone. And also some dear, dear friends. I also am going to admit that because of my experience with kids and kids generally and children's literature, I decided to take this prompt in a bit of a sideways direction. There is this idea, popular in most school libraries and classrooms worth their salt, that books can act as windows or mirrors. This terminology has deep pedagogical roots. Coined in a 1988 essay by Emily Stile, the window-mirror dichotomy was explicitly connected to literacy by Rudine Bishop in 1990. She writes, "Books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange." She continues, "When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. The ideas of books as windows and mirrors has fueled a much needed push for diversification of classroom libraries. All children deserve to see themselves reflected in books, and all children deserve to be able to see the lives of others, to learn and experience their shared humanity. At the same time, there's also been this recognition that it isn't enough for books to be about those with marginalized identities. They need to also be by those people too. The hashtag Own Voices movement has fueled a literary renaissance of children's books from a rainbow coalition of authors. What a gift it is to teach now when the richness of the human experience is more available than ever on our classroom bookshelves. It wasn't until sitting down to think of my own reading life that I paused and thought about my own windows, my own mirrors. Surely I read lots of books with white, middle class, even Jewish protagonists, but none of them seemed to chafe at their own gendered expectations the way I did, except for maybe Ferdinand the Bull. Instead, I often found myself drawn to heroines who, either by emotional trauma or historical confines, had to overcome their circumstances to find themselves. Whether that be through truly grieving their dead mother, like in Sharon Creech's Walk Two Moons, or coming to terms with life in a new country, as in Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz-Ryan. That is all to say that the book I am talking about today, I didn't read as a child, and I certainly doesn't reflect my experience. But it sparkles with so much humanity that I'm compelled to sing its praises to anyone who will listen. And so tonight, that's all of you. Based on her own life as a Chinese immigrant in 1990s Anaheim, Kelly Yang's Front Desk tells the story of Mia Tang and her family as they navigate her 5th grade year while managing a motel, the Cala Vista Inn. Mia is a plucky, strong-willed heroine that in many ways is cut from the same cloth as Pippi Longstocking. She loves running the front desk of the Cala Vista and gets into delightful hijinks, overextending herself beyond her experience. She messes up laundry, she mixes up keys, she screws up the wake-up call system. At all points, we're rooting for her. But the beauty of Yang's novel isn't in the familiar follies of the young, but in the unexpected environment in which Mia blossoms. The Tang family has been in the United States for just over a year. Mia's parents left a struggling Chinese economy in the midst of the one-child policy. They left professional careers in engineering to discover the harsh reality of a post-Reagan America. After a summer experiencing homelessness and a series of exploitative minimum wage jobs, they agree to manage and live in the Cala Vista run by the hostile Mr. Yao. From the very beginning, Mr. Yao treats the Tang family with contempt, threatening them, disparaging them, and cheating them out of a living wage. Luckily, Mia isn't alone. She quickly befriends Lupe, her classmate, whose dad also works for Mr. Yao as a cable repairman. Lupe acts as Mia's sidekick, cheering Mia on, but also keeping her in check when Mia's impulsive nature gets the better of her. Lupe also acts as an audience surrogate, teaching us alongside Mia about the way things are. As Mia begins to realize the unfairness in her family's relationship as workers to Mr. Yao, Lupe provides Mia perhaps the most elegant and developmentally appropriate description of income inequality I've ever read. Lupe tells Mia, there are 2 roller coasters in America, one for the rich and one for poor people. On the rich roller coaster, people have money, so their kids get to go to great schools. Then they grow up and make a lot of money, so their kids get to go to great schools. And round they go, Lupe said. And poor people, I asked? We're on a different roller coaster. On our roller coaster, our parents don't have money, so we can't go to good schools, and then we can't get good jobs. So then our kids can't go to good schools, they can't get good jobs, and so on and so forth, Lupe said. Every year when I read this book to my class, I notice how unfamiliar this terrain seems to my students. Later in the book, one of Mia's mentors, an African-American resident of the Cala Vista named Hank, is arrested for suspicion of a crime he didn't commit. He too has to explain to Mia the ways in which white supremacy code him as guilty before he makes one move out of his motel room door. This incident doesn't surprise my students. The idea of generational poverty does. The gift of this book, beyond it being a window into Mia's life and a mirror for those who are experiencing poverty, is the gift of this metaphor. A roller coaster can be fun for some, but horrible for others. But no matter how good the ride is, you want to get off eventually. By understanding our capitalist reality as man-made, we render it changeable. What happens if we loosen the screws of the roller coaster? What happens if we knock it down altogether? Front Desk opens kids' eyes to the world and workers around them. It's not as if they become overnight labor organizers, but if they're given a framework to understand why it is that some people have so little and some people have so much. When we encounter books that are windows to new experiences that are not our own, we inevitably see ourselves. While I do think that books can be windows or mirrors, I think most often books are windows and mirrors. That even when we experience the life of an unknown 10-year-old, we see the world as it is, and perhaps a path to how it ought to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was beautiful. And it also, this was not a ringer, but I will say that my secret goal with this project is to undermine capitalism through the works of children's literature. So that was great. And I'm just going to introduce our next reader. You'll notice throughout this lineup, I didn't plan for this, but this is a very, very podcast heavy lineup, which I'm absolutely fine with. Chelsey Zhu is a junior in the college studying English and classics. She is the campus editor for 34th Street magazine. She also co-hosts, edits, and produces a podcast on children's literature called Kidlit Chronicles, which discusses the value in adults revisiting childhood classics and the effect that nostalgia has on our impression of books. The podcast is available on Spotify, and I have listened, and you should too. So Chelsey, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for the introduction.
She also co-hosts, edits, and produces a podcast.
So the book that I picked to talk to you guys about today is Aragon by Christopher Paolini, which is part of a 4-part series called The Inheritance Cycle. So Aragon is the name of the first book, and it's also the name of the protagonist, who is a 16-year-old farm boy in a sort of medieval fantasy world ruled by a corrupt king. One day, he's out hunting in the forest, and he finds a dragon egg, which hatches for him and takes him on this crazy journey filled with adventure, political intrigue, magic, elves, dwarves. The book pretty much has everything. And it all leads him to this mission where he has to kill the king. So I read the first 3 books in the series when I was 9 years old, and no book series has ever been more important to me. It's my favorite for so many reasons, and it's honestly hard to even describe the influence it's had on my life. The most straightforward way I can explain it is that for a while, I was seriously thinking about getting a tattoo inspired by Aragon until my friends convinced me that I don't want a giant dragon on my body for the rest of my life. And if anybody watching this has a tattoo of a dragon, that's super awesome. I'm just a little scared of that level of commitment. So Aragon was the very first book that got me addicted to reading. It really felt like I was having an out-of-body experience while I was reading it because the world was so real and so elaborate. And it was the first instance where the characters felt so complex that I cared about them like I cared about real people. After I finished reading the first book, I remembered that I'd fall asleep, imagining myself as a character in the story. I had it all planned out. I would definitely be an elf. I would have white hair, and my dragon would be a white dragon because we had to be matching, and my dragon's scales would reflect the rainbow in the sunlight. Yes, I was really deep into it. My favorite part of the book was that the magic system was really elaborate. One part that really drew me in was the concept of a true name. So this explanation is going to be a little convoluted, so please bear with me. The way that magic works in the books is through the ancient language, which kind of serves as a channel for all the magical energy to go through, like how spells work in Harry Potter. And the reason why the ancient language has that power is because every word in that language is the true name of whatever object you're trying to manipulate. And once you know something's true name, you have complete control over it. So everyday objects in the book have true names that are pretty widely known, which is why people can do magic, but people themselves also have true names, which are specific to who they are. Your true name is a series of words that represent you in the ancient language, and it acts like the key to your soul. If you know it, then you know exactly who you are and what's important to you. For example, if I were to try to guess my own true name, it would probably have the words Cheez-Its, NPR, and indecisiveness in it, because those 3 words pretty much make up my personality. True names really appealed to me as a kid because I didn't know who I was. And the concept of having a phrase that would give you the answer, that seemed incredible to me. All this is to say that Aragon made me ravenous for more. I wanted to visit other worlds through books, and I also wanted to create them. I started trying to write my own stories with the goal of making people care about the characters I wrote about so much that they felt like real people, which was the out-of-body experience I got with Aragon. Every couple of years or so, I'd reread Aragon and the 3 other books in the series. It was always a sort of familiar base I could return to lose myself into a book, and it also never stopped giving me the ideas and the feelings I wanted to capture in my own writing. I can tell you that I'm here at Penn as a writer and an English major because I picked up Aragon in the 4th grade. But as I grew older, I realized that nobody, and I mean not a single person I've ever known, likes Aragon. Most people haven't heard of it, and when they have, their impressions are usually not good. My best friend in the world told me that she read the first book and thought it was boring. The critical reviews of the book are also pretty brutal. Critics called it cliché, with B-movie dialogue and awkward and gangly prose. Another review said that the plot was straight out of Star Wars by way of Lord of the Rings, with bits of other great fantasies thrown in here and there. Now, what I'm about to say next might be considered blasphemy. I've never read The Lord of the Rings, and I've never seen Star Wars. So it was never a problem for me that Aragon was cliché. I thought Aragon was the original and everything else was the imitation. So I was shocked that people thought my favorite book sucked. I felt a little bit like an outsider, that my favorite kids book, a huge part of my identity, was something most people didn't even like or appreciate within the field of kid lit. And all these weird feelings I was having about Aragon were kind of part of a bigger weird cluster of feelings I had about books and reading and being an English major in college. I'm going to admit that sometimes I have a bit of imposter syndrome as an English major. For my classes, I write pages and pages of essays on Shakespeare and Baldwin and Toni Morrison, but in my free time, I never read books that are that highbrow. I like to read Stephen King and YA and kids' books. I've never read Jane Austen in my life, and I probably never will unless I take a class that requires it. Like Arielle said about herself in the beginning of this program, being in this hyper intellectual environment sometimes makes me feel like critical value is what I should be judging books on instead of personal meaning. All the pressures of an academic environment sometimes push me to believe that the first thing is more important. But what brings me back from all these thoughts is remembering how much more Aragon is to me than just the story, than just the words on a page. A huge part of my relationship with the book, especially when I was a kid, revolved around learning that Christopher Paolini wrote it when he was just 14 years old. When I was 14, I also wrote my first novel. It was 111 pages, and it was called Spiritology. It's about this young, shy Chinese-American girl living in a small town. Basically, it was self-insert fan fiction. But the girl could also talk to spirits, and she's recruited to a school where kids learn to commune with ghosts. My book's been sitting in a dusty corner of Google Docs for years, but I actually looked over it again recently. If I were to write my own scathing negative review, I'd say it was cliché, with B-movie dialogue and a plot straight out of Harry Potter by way of The Shining. But I've learned that that's how people start writing and get better at writing. Blatant plagiarism that slowly turns into something unique and original. Knowing that Paolini published his book when he was still a kid, and that now he had become a successful author, gave me hope as a writer, and nothing that a critical review could say can take that away from me. Aragon has taught me to unapologetically love the things that I love because they're a part of who I am. I'm 21 and I still don't know what my true name is. It will probably be forever until I figure it out. But I know that my love for reading and writing is part of it. And if writing is a part of my true name, then so is Aragon. And since I'm confident that that's true, maybe I should get that dragon tattoo after all. Thank you.
Chelsey, thank you so much. I am glad that my video was off because when you were describing this novel, I was like doing this. I would love to read it. I also very much feel you because the year that I started this project was the year that Maurice Sendak, my all-time favorite, died. And my first impulse was to tattoo the entire wild rumpus across the top of my back, and then I thought differently of it. But I will now introduce our next reader. Thank you, Anton Moore, for joining us. Anton Moore works as a freelance TV producer, a community activist, and an event planner. He is president and founder of Unity in the Community, a nonprofit dedicated to bringing about change in the lives of South Philadelphians. Anton's been called a game changer, a hero of the community, and one of Billy Penn's list of Who's Next public service for 2018. In 2016, he was appointed by Governor Tom Wolfe to be a member of the Pennsylvania Commission on African American Affairs, which serves as the Commonwealth's advocate agency for the African American community in Pennsylvania. For 7 years, he produced and booked talent for television segments for BET's Rap City and The Deal, as well as awards shows. He started in broadcasting as an intern at WUSL Power 99 FM and went on to be a producer and on-site personality while also attending the Community College of Philadelphia. Anton was born in Philadelphia and was raised in the Tasker Homes housing development in South Philadelphia. Anton, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. How y'all doing today? So the book that I would like to talk about that like caught my attention at such a young age, and some of you might laugh, but it was Little Red Riding Hood. And as a kid, when my aunt read this book to me, I thought it was like one big joke. And the reason why this book, Little Red Riding Hood, which is by I'm sorry, y'all, I'm getting what's the name? Why this book meant a lot to me is because when you look at life, you see different type of wolves. You see wolves that are not polite. You see wolves that are evil. You see in the field that I'm in, gun violence wolves. You see robbers who I consider to be wolves, and they act as different people when you first meet them. But once you get a better sense of them, you get a better understanding of what they're about. And the reason, like I said, this book stuck with me is because when I read this book, my aunt used to play music all the time. And this book is actually attached to a song by an old school R&B group called The Whispers. And it was called Olivia. And basically Olivia was basically a spinoff of the book that talked about a woman who got lost and distracted on her way to grandmother's house. A lot of times when I'm working in the community, you come across different people. And being as though that you come across different people, they come from all walks of life. As I mentioned, some are good and some are bad. But to be able to, talk about these things, these are some of the things I talk to at-risk young men all the time about different people that they encounter in life. Some mean them good, some mean them bad. So when I thought about this book, Little Red Riding Hood, it always stuck out to me because it shows the different expressions and the different personalities of everyday people that I encounter on a daily basis. So when I was asked about, look, Anton, I want you to, talk about a book that stuck out to you throughout your life, this is the first book that came to me. And I actually read it again just to sharpen up my skills about it, but it definitely pertains to, everyday people that you meet on a daily basis. And as I said before, some of them come as good people and some of them come as bad people. But a lot of them that come as bad, they disguise themselves as other people. And that's why this book stuck out to me.
Thank you so much, Anton. And first of all, Anton is my neighbor. I did not realize this. I moved into this house like a week before, not a week, but like a few weeks before pandemic lockdown. And I just figured out a few weeks ago that Anton is doing supply drives about 6 blocks from my house, like all the time. So Anton, this is me like publicly saying, I need to come volunteer with you. So I'm now on the hook. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm also going to introduce our next reader. Mahailya Hinsey is a sophomore in the college studying creative writing and photography. She works for the Kelly Writers House. She has always loved books and has been making up stories for as long as she can remember, including long nonsense survival scenarios. Nowadays, she can be found avoiding people and watching clips from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Thank you, Mahailya.
Hi, I'm Mahailya. So for my book, when I was asked to do this, the first thing I did is I went home and stared at my bookshelf because I just genuinely had no idea what I was going to talk about. And I ended up looking at this book called Along for the Ride by Sarah Dessen. And I thought to myself, I don't remember when I read this, but I know I read it a lot. And then, as if my past self knew that I'd have to talk about it at some point, when I opened the front cover, it said in big letters in Sharpie, "You got this book the summer of 2013." And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. So I was 12 then. The book follows a girl named Auden, and she's spending the summer with her father and her new stepmother who just had her first child. And the child's a very fussy baby, and Auden has insomnia. So she spends a lot of her time just taking this baby on like long strolls at night around this beach town that they're in. And she ends up meeting this boy, Eli, who's all like abs and dark brooding past. And he essentially is like, hey, you've never had a childhood, so let's just go do kid stuff together in the middle of the night. That's going to be your summer. It's going to be us doing all like the things that kids should have done, like having a newspaper route and going bowling and having weenie roasts and doing things like that. And looking back on it, I think at the time, I couldn't put my finger on why I liked the book so much, because I reread it so many times. And I thought back then that I was like, oh, it must be like the romance element of it. But looking on it now, I think the reason I liked it so much is because it represented freedom. Like the idea of going outside, of wandering around, of rediscovering where you are when no one else is around, of rediscovering who you are when no one else is around, of when the book takes place, it's the summer before she goes off to college, of figuring out who you are when you're not defined by what your parents tell you to do. And that was so appealing to me as a 12-year-old, getting ready to become a teenager, getting ready to go to high school. It helped me realize how much I didn't like about my surroundings. I didn't like school, I didn't like my friends, but I knew that one day I could, and one day I could find people that I like and people I like being around. And that, which is kind of a ridiculous fear to have at 12, but like it wasn't quote unquote too late, and that everything can re-evolve. And in reading this, I reread this book at many different points in my life, including my first day of high school, because I had switched into a new school 2 months into school starting, and I was terrified I couldn't make friends. And I brought that book with me because to remind me as everything has the potential to change. No matter what happens in this first day of school, you're gonna be okay ultimately. And if high school doesn't work out, there's always college. And then a pandemic happened. But yeah, I guess I just want to say I appreciate this book, and I appreciate its expression of freedom. And I appreciate that it gave me a baseline concept as a 12-year-old of not only who I wanted to be, but who I was. I was a person who loved being outside, who loved being with people, but also loved being alone, who loved writing, and who loved the idea and the establishment of independence. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahailya. That's one of my favorite things, is to like think about a book that used to be important to you and to revisit it and to be like, oh, this is why I liked it. Like I didn't, not even surface level. It's one of the benefits of hindsight. So I'm glad that you reimagined that. Our next reader is Huda Fakhrredine. Huda Fakhredine's work focuses on modernist movements or trends in Arabic poetry and their relationship to the Arabic literary tradition. She is interested in the role of the Arabic, and I hope you will correct my pronunciation, please do, Kadisa, as a space for negotiating the foreign and the indigenous, the modern and the traditional, and its relationship to other poetic forms such as the free verse poem and the prose poem. She is the author of Metapoesis in the Arabic tradition and the co-translator of Lighthouse for the Drowning and The Sky That Denied Me. Her translations of modern Arabic poems have appeared in Banipal, World Literature Today, Nimrod, Arab Lit Quarterly, and Middle Eastern Literatures, among others. Her book of creative nonfiction, titled Zaman, Saghir, Taht, Thaniya, A Small Time Under a Different Sun, was published by Dar al-Nahda, Beirut in 2019. Her book, The Arabic Prose Poem, Poetic Theory and Practice, is forthcoming from Edinburgh University Press in 2021. Huda, thank you for joining us, and please say the name of your book so that I can hear how much I butchered it.
زمن صغير تحت شمس ثانية. You got it. Thank you, Arielle, very much. I enjoyed listening to all of you immensely, and I hate to be the boring academic. Your takes on these books are refreshing and exhilarating. And when Arielle invited me to this wonderful gathering, I was very excited, but then a little bit baffled because I couldn't think of a children's book from my childhood. And the reasons for that are many. We'll not get into them, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about a book that's not a children's book, but it's a book from my childhood. It is a text that I think about when I think about beginnings, the beginnings of my relationship with language, with poetry, the beginnings of my consciousness of time and place and the world around me. And a copy of this text is what I first packed when I left home in Lebanon and came to the United States in 2005. So this is a collection of 7 pre-Islamic poems that are called the Mu'allaqat in Arabic, which translates as the hung poems or the hung odes. And these are some of the earliest examples of the Arabic language. And they're called the hung odes because stories have it that these poems were celebrated and venerated and written in gold on the walls of the Kaaba in Mecca, which was a holy place before the advent of Islam. And these are 7 poems written by 7 different poets. Each poem is a world of its own. It has its own mood and tone and purpose. But they're all written in the same form, which is the qasida form. And they all share a transitional section, which is a journey in the desert, where the poet says to himself and those listening to him that I can leave a difficult place. I can leave this tight corner of nostalgia, loss, failed love, and I can set out on a journey in the open desert. So as an adult, as a student of Arabic poetry and a teacher, I've spent a lot of time reading these poems and rereading them and teaching them and translating them. But as a child of 5 or 6, these poems were magical texts to me. Before I knew them in book form, I knew them as sound. I heard my father read them. They always resonated in our house. And these are difficult poems. Their meanings were completely obscure and sometimes entirely inaccessible to me. But I memorized many of their verses. They were sounds that I could hear and see and taste. And I was convinced that memorizing them and reading them out loud was a superpower. And the desert journeys, these sections that describe journeys in the desert, were the most appealing to me. These verses where the poet says to himself, I can leave all this behind and I can be somewhere else. I can be someone else. All I need to do is set out in the open desert, riding on the line of poetry. And I think perhaps the reason why these sections were so appealing to me is probably because I grew up in Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War, and my earliest childhood memories are all in tight and crowded and dangerous places, underground shelters, borrowed relatives' homes, other people's rooms, usually crowded with boxes and packed suitcases, the backseat of my father's car as we, the family, escaped from one part of the city to the other. And so it was liberating and empowering to me as a child to think that a line of verse I memorize and recite out loud can open a door onto an endless landscape where anything is possible. And although these 7 poems are thought of as central part of the Arabic literary canon, and speaking to Chelsey's point about works that are highbrow or placed on a pedestal, I always like to think of these poems as mine as a child. And even if I misread them or misunderstood them, I owned them, I can claim them. And to Josh's point, they were my windows to the world. And I like to think that they were my mirrors as well. And the most fascinating part of them was their sounds. They were magical spells that could take me anywhere. And that's why I'd like to end, this is my short talk. I'd like to end it by reading to you some of the verses that I memorized as a 5-year-old. And back then I understood nothing. So I won't read a translation, but I'll paraphrase. So in the first 2 verses, the poet is describing the deserted campsite where the woman he loves, and her name is Nawar, used to live, but she's no longer there. And then in the last 2 verses, I'm only going to read 4. He turns to her and tells her, yes, I love you and I care about you, But remember, I can leave whenever I want. And if things get uncomfortable, or literally, he says, when I feel a little bit of death seeping, I'm out of here. I can be wherever I want. Of course, those are things I came to understand later, but as a 5-year-old, I just read them as magical spells. So the poet, his name is Labid, and he says, عفت الديار محلها فمقامها بمنى تأبد غولها فرجامها ومدافع الريان عري رسمها خلقا كما ضمن الوحي سلامها أولم تكن تدري نوار بأنني وصال عقد حبائل جذامها تراك أمكنة إذا لم أرضها أو يعتلق بعض النفوس حمامها. Thank you.
Huda, thank you so much for that. I think there hasn't been a ton in the history of this project. There hasn't been a ton of poetry, engagement with poetry and children's verse, even though that's such a huge thing. And to watchers, I encourage you to Google Huda's name. There are videos on YouTube of children from Albustan Seeds of Culture, which is a nonprofit here in Philadelphia that promotes cross-cultural diversity and is rooted in Arab art and language. There are videos of children reading poems that Huda translated. So I would definitely check that out. The next and final reader is somebody who I kind of daydreamed about begging to do this project even before I met her, and in the years since, she's become a friend, so I could just reach out and ask, which is kind of great. She's also the third podcaster. Sarah Marshall is a writer, podcaster, and media critic focused on setting straight our collective memory, or at least getting to the bottom of why we believe and in turn define ourselves by popular narrative and myth. Why is the maligned woman a staple of our news media? Why do we believe that serial killers are brilliant? How do we keep stumbling into all these moral panics? These are some of the questions that propel Sarah forward. She is the co-host of the popular modern history podcast You're Wrong About, which has been highlighted in The New Yorker, The Guardian, and Time Magazine, as well as the podcast Why Are Dads? I think this might be a slightly old bio, but Why Are Dads is also amazing. Her writing has appeared in The Believer, BuzzFeed, and the true crime collection Unspeakable Acts. She loves Portland, Oregon, Philly, and Las Vegas in that order, and it has been rumored that she is working on a book about the Satanic Panic. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really such a wonderful honor to sort of round out the night, and I have a cat to help me do that, so that's good. And so my original idea was to talk about Mrs. Pigglewiggle. And then I realized that most of Mrs. Pigglewiggle's cures feel like Saw scenarios for children. And I was like, I love those books, but I don't know if I think that I know they've influenced me to love Saw, but I don't know if that's something that is as universal as I might think it is. And then I realized that the most maybe universal message in a book that I love and that has been a big influence on me, or the one that I at least like to spend the most time sharing, is the theme of the monster at the end of this book by Grover, which is a book that I think is pretty sophisticated, actually. It's definitely the first book that I read where you have the fourth wall be broken in such a way by the character talking to you. But essentially the premise is that Grover of Sesame Street has been informed by reading the title that the book that he is in and that you are reading and turning the pages in has a monster at the end of it. And so he comes to you with a proposition, which is, listen, I have an idea. If you do not turn any pages, we will never get to the end of this book. And that is good because there is a monster at the end of this book. So please do not turn the page. And in the past few years, in this period where writing has gone for me from an activity that was always something I could find my way into, always something that I could kind of turn on, even when things were difficult. It's become something that is less accessible to me. And then I think in the past year, because of the kind of grief response that I think a lot of us are maybe manifesting this way, writing and reading and just working with language on the page has become alienating for me in a way that I never expected it to. And I think trying to figure out, you know, how do you go easy on yourself and how do you return to the place and to the vocation that, you know, potentially is one of the central parts of your identity. I think one of the fears that for me has also become part of the act of writing in recent years is this idea that, you know, there's a monster at the end of this book. And if I finish a project or if I get something on the page, then I will witness myself in a way that I'm afraid of. And I am convinced that this Grover book is one of the more sophisticated texts that exist in terms of addressing this as one of the central fears that stops us from creating or that stops work from getting into the world or stops us from witnessing ourselves in the way that our art does ask us to do, is the fear of what we will find. And so I'm going to spoil the book and tell you that the finale is that you keep turning the pages. Grover keeps trying to keep you from turning the pages, and he ties them down and he hammers up a bunch of wood to stop it, and he builds a brick wall, and you go ahead and turn the page, and he says, "Did you know that you are very strong?" And finally you get to the last page, and Grover says, "Well, look at that. This is the end of the book, and the only one here is me. I, lovable, furry old Grover, am the monster at the end of this book. And you were so scared." The end. And so I'm just sort of continue to be amazed by this book, especially this year, as you know, because of its length, it becomes, you know, one of the books that I am most comfortable reading as my brain has trouble with, you know, long sentences and paragraphs of the kind that used to come somewhat naturally to me. And I think, you know, this is a message that probably I need more in adulthood than I ever did as a child, which is that the monster at the end of the book that you are writing, or that you are reading, if you are reading in a way to try and understand more deeply humanity or yourself or both, that the monster at the end of the book is you, and you're very lovable. Yeah, and that is my closing. That's my one thought for the day. And you can have it. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much. Also, classic, one of my faves. I think we had our friend Eric Thomas has also interpreted this book for this project. He called it Borges for Toddlers, and I'm pretty sure it's just about the mortifying ordeal of being known, which is kind of the entire purpose of this project. So I just want to thank everybody else for coming here, everybody in the chat. If you want to recommend a favorite children's book, please throw it in the chat. I always want to learn and hear more. I am shocked that in all the years of doing this project, nobody has ever touched the Animorphs. Come on down, please submit your essay. I would love to hear from you. And then just a final call to action. You know, I do this project, I ask people to re-examine their favorite children's books. It can feel a little navel-gazy if you don't think about it in a broader capacity. You can think about that this is a project about, like, what did I like and why did I like it and how did it make me? But my goal with this project always is to get people to use themselves as the catalyst for, like, oh, this is why I think this kind of thing is important. So I just ask you to think about the importance of these books. To the next time that you have a friend whose kid is having a birthday party, get them a book. the next time you're thinking about where should I give my next charitable donation, look at who is giving books to children, like not just your libraries, which you should already be supporting, but certainly just how do we get books into the hands of children who can love them? I think it's really important, and I think that that it continues to be, even if it does horrible things like make them look at themselves and who they are. Thank you again so much to Kelly Writers House for hosting this, even in this strange decentralized capacity. Thank you to Lucy DeMarco and the Kathy DeMarco and the Lucy F. DeMarco Fund for Youth Literature. And thank you to the staff of Writers House who kept this running. And I want everybody to thank Josh, Chelsey, Anton, Huda, Mahailya, and Sarah for being our readers tonight. And in any other time, I would tell you to move on down to the dining room and help yourself to a reception full of after-school snacks. I cannot offer that to you. I really hope that you will go slice up an apple and have it with some peanut butter, make yourself some ants on a log, break into the handy snacks, have a fruit by the foot, do what you gotta do. Thank you so much for joining us.